Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. Have you ever wanted to know what it's like to be Sherlock Holmes, maybe with all of the powers of deduction and none of the addiction, to piece together seemingly insignificant details and mold them into this cohesive narrative outlining the exact course of events that transpired in a given crime? Well, look a little further, because this game's not going to make you feel like that. What it will do is make you feel like you're close, like you're trying to do that, like you are working alongside Sherlock Holmes, stepping in to help solve a crime while he is indisposed. This game is called Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. I'm talking specifically about the Baker Street Irregulars. There are multiple versions of this game that you can buy. It's the one that I own personally. I have played other versions of it, but I'm most familiar with this one. For the most part, the different boxes contain the same game, at least the same core mechanics, with a different story. But Baker Street Irregulars does introduce a new mechanic, which we'll talk about later, that I think makes this one my go-to recommendation in the series. This is a game by Gary Grady and Suzanne Goldberg, published by Space Cowboys. This box in particular has scenarios designed by Dave Neal, who did a fantastic job creating this compelling narrative. In this version, you do play as members of the Baker Street Irregulars, which is kind of a street gang of kids who work together to try to solve crimes with or for Detective Sherlock Holmes. So what is this game? This is, simply put, a crime-solving game. You're presented with a crime and a little bit of backstory, and then you are set loose into London to try and solve that crime. Either you by yourself or alongside up to 7 other people, following up on leads, trying to track down new clues and further investigate clues that you've already uncovered. In the box, you will find a very slim rulebook, a bunch of case files, a London directory, a bunch of newspaper articles, a beautiful map of London, and a list of informants. There are no dice rolls, there are no cards to draw, there is no board to move around on. You're also asked to provide your own pen and paper, or I suppose you could take notes on your phone or your laptop. As long as you have some way of taking notes, you'll be fine. I would even go so far as to say that it's required to take notes during the course of this game. There's not really much of a setup to this game. All you do is open the box, take out the map and the directory and your list of informants, grab the relevant case and newspaper, open your notebook, and get to work. The rules are refreshingly simple as the story is complex. After deciding which case you want to take, probably case 1 if it's your first game, you look to the bottom right of the cover of the case file, where you'll find today's date. In this case, it's Thursday, November 19th, in 1885. Then you rifle through the stack of newspapers that are in your box, searching for one with a date that matches the case. Then you open up your case file and read a couple of pages of narrative, which will probably outline where Sherlock Holmes is and why he needs your help, and then go into the mystery, or the crime that has been committed. And at this point, the game has already begun. Somebody's going to read this aloud as somebody else takes notes, being careful to jot down any names or businesses that are brought up that you want to look into further. Everything can be a clue. Once you're done going over the case details, your lead detective is going to choose the first lead that they want to chase down. Most of the time, what that looks like is pointing out a name or a location, finding it in the London directory, picking out the address, finding that address on the map, and then flipping to the relevant page in the case file where you can read through what happens when you get to that location. And that's kind of it. Each time you get to a new location, you're going to talk to somebody or a group of somebodies, and you'll uncover more details, very subtle details most of the time. As a group, you have to parse through what this person said and pick out the fine bits of information. Maybe they mentioned the last name of somebody, or a street that they walked down. Maybe you found out that they work in some sort of factory. You'll take all this in and you'll search either in your map or in your directory or in today's paper, and you'll try to extract even more. Maybe they'll mention that they were at the zoo with a friend, and you find in the newspaper that there was a new exhibit opening up at the zoo this weekend, and you can find that zoo in the directory, and then when you get to the zoo, they tell you who was working that night. It just keeps going from there. That's an entirely made-up scenario, but I really don't want to give any clues as to what is between these pages because the story is really interesting. And like I said, every little bit is a clue, and I wouldn't want to take anything away from the experience of playing the game. If you're playing in a group of people, after you read through an interaction at a location, the next person around the table is now the lead detective, and they choose the next lead to follow. It could be a follow-up on the lead that you were already on the trail of, or it can be completely different. It's whatever they want, really. But you work together as a group. It is a cooperative game. There's a lot of discussion between terms, and you're constantly passing around the map and the newspaper and the case files, and everyone's just shouting their theories over each other the whole way through. Any interactions that you've had in this casebook, you are more than welcome to flip back to at any time. But every lead that you did not chase down, you don't want to read. They're all here in the book, and there's multiple leads per page, so it's really up to you and just kind of the honor system that you're not reading anything outside of your section. I've found myself in my groups covering up parts of the case files to make sure that we don't accidentally cheat or get any information that we didn't already earn. Along with the people that you choose to play with, you're also given a list of informants. These are characters in the game that you're welcome to go and visit with during your investigation. Each of them has their own kind of expertise. For example, one of these informants is Sir Jasper Meeks, the medical examiner. They perform the autopsy on all bodies found during the investigation. It's pretty clear how that would be relevant in a lot of these cases. They won't all be relevant, though. And similarly, not all the addresses listed out on this map are going to be relevant. You can't just blindly pick an address and find it in the casebook. You might get lucky and it might be in there, but there are a lot of addresses here. And if you did that, more often than not, you'd find an empty entry, or the address simply won't be listed in here. If the address isn't in the book, you can kind of ignore that you tried to do that. You don't have to write down that that was a lead that you tried to follow if you don't want. If it is in the book, though, I would write it down, even if the entry results in a one-line interaction. In the Baker Street Irregulars, there are 10 cases to be solved. The first 4 are kind of standalone cases. You could play case 1 with a group, and case 2 with a different group, and case 3 by yourself, and it won't matter. It won't impact anything. Nobody's going to be missing out on anything. But cases 5 through 10 really build on each other. Case 10 specifically should absolutely be saved for last because it has elements from cases 5 through 9, but really I would recommend going in chronological order through the cases anyway. As I mentioned before, each case comes with the daily newspaper. The different versions of the game have different rules in regards to what I'm about to say, but specifically in this box, once you get to case 6 and beyond, you're supposed to use all relevant newspaper articles from that year. So any articles happening in the year of 1886 up to the date of your case that you're currently working on are relevant. This means there's more information than you've had for the previous 5 cases, and with that, a little bit more chaos. As I've mentioned a few times, there are other versions of this game, and if you can't find this specific one, that's okay. They're all great. I would specifically recommend the Jack the Ripper box, but really, they're all good. If you can find this one, though, I do highly recommend it, and that's almost entirely based on this one new mechanic that they've introduced in this game, and that is on the back of the informants list, there is this play aid sheet. This introduces a sort of checkpoint system in the game. In previous versions of the game, there are times where it's possible that you chase down a lead that you weren't necessarily supposed to chase down yet, which could result in kind of spoiling information for you. Instead, with this version of the game, you have a bunch of interactions in this book that either start or end with telling you to circle a letter on your play aid sheet. And then there are other interactions in the book that will tell you not to read it if you don't have a specific letter circled. This is a really simple but elegant way of kind of hiding information from you. It also makes it interesting to kind of go back to some of these locations and follow up a lead that kind of went dry. You may read a big paragraph and then you're told to stop reading if you haven't circled the letter H. And then as you investigate more things, you will circle that letter and you'll remember, oh yeah, now I can go back to this person and they have more to tell me. That happens a lot specifically with Sherlock Holmes, who is one of your informants and who has a lot of information about the case that you're working. It's important to note that the game doesn't necessarily end when you solve the case. The game really ends when you want it to. If you've gone for 20 minutes down this rabbit hole and you cannot dig yourself out, the game's over. Just end the game. That's fine. Walk away. Oftentimes, I would imagine that that would result in a higher score than if you did try to chase down all of the loose ends. Once you do decide that the game is over, either because you've solved it or because you've given up, you turn to the very back of your case file. Here you'll find a list of questions that you are unknowingly trying to answer, an envelope that contains the answers and point values to those questions, and you'll also see the solution written out in a few pages. This goes through the kind of closing interaction between you and your group and Sherlock Holmes himself, where he tells you that he, of course, has solved the case while you were working on it, and then he makes you feel stupid about it. The goal is not necessarily to solve it before Sherlock Holmes, because he will do it in the fastest way possible. And I would honestly be shocked if anybody has ever solved any of these cases faster than him. That's the way he was written in this game. It's written so that he solves it in the fastest way possible. Instead, what you're really trying to do is to just compare how you did versus how he did. Each question that you answered gives you a certain number of points. You add up those points, and then you separately figure out how many leads you followed to get to those answers. You're told how many leads Sherlock Holmes followed, and for each lead that you followed over the number that Sherlock Holmes followed, you subtract 5 points from your score. If you followed fewer leads than Sherlock Holmes, you add 5 for each fewer lead. If you've scored 100 points after answering your questions, and Sherlock Holmes solved the case in 10 leads, but you've solved it in 11 leads, then you scored a 95. If you scored it in 9 leads, you have 105. In my most recent playthrough, we scored 160 points from the questions alone, but we did that by chasing down 38 different leads. When we got to the solution, we found out that Sherlock Holmes solved it after following 9 leads. So that left us with 15 points. And then at the end of the rule book, they show you kind of different brackets. If you score within this many points, then it says this about you. So ours said, sometimes even good investigators fail. Review the game tips and maybe you'll do better next time. AKA, we did a horrible job. We essentially lost, but it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't prevent us from opening the next case and trying again. The only real con to this game, if I had to mention one, would be in its replayability. That's because there isn't really any replayability. Once you solve a case, you know how that case is solved. There is a specific narrative going from point A to point B, and while you might track down different things on a subsequent playthrough, you'll be doing it with privileged information, so it doesn't really work. That being said, again, there are 10 cases in this box. That is at least 10 hours of gameplay, probably a lot more. I don't think I finished any of these cases in less than a couple of hours. As you've seen, I'm horrible at this game, but still, the game takes time. There's a lot of value in the box, even though there's not a lot of replayability. And then when you do get to the end of the game, like I said, there are multiple other versions of the game that you can pick up. All in all, this is a fantastic game. It works great as a solo experience, and then it works just as well with up to 8 people. There's not really any reason that you can't play with more than 8 people, other than it's possible that you may only be the lead investigator once, or if you play with 11 people, maybe that 11th person wouldn't ever get a chance to be the lead investigator if your group is really good. But again, it took me and my group 38 leads to get to the solution in my last playthrough, so that might not actually be a problem for you and your group. There's definitely a lot of reading involved in the game and a lot of thinking, but it's a cooperative game, so you are doing all these things together. You can trade off who's taking notes, you can trade off who's reading a section of the case file, and you can share the mental load that is the solution to this case. I love this game. I highly recommend this game, and I would love to know if you have played it before or if you've played anything similar to it. I think that's it. That's all I have for you today. So I will see you next week. Bye.